Captain Midnight.
So near the end of my last video on Avengers Infinity War, I said this. How do you recast Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark? I'll go ahead and answer that for you. You don't. And maybe not surprisingly, a lot of people seem to disagree with me, with commenters citing Spider-Man, Batman, and other heroes who've been through multiple actors as examples for how recasting could work. Even MCU mastermind Kevin Feige has gotten in on this in the past, saying, you can look to Sherlock Holmes, James Bond, and Batman as characters that last longer than any one actor playing them. There's a precedent for it in other franchises that suggests that it's possible. And all of you aren't wrong. There is a case to be made that recasting him is possible, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Marvel try to do it someday. But in my opinion, this strikes me as a terrible idea. And the reason for that basically comes down to two things: tone and continuity. First, let's talk about tone, and a character that's already been brought up, James Bond. The gold standard for franchises that are able to swap out their main actor every decade or so, totaling 6 actors playing the secret agent over the course of 55 years. And it's worked out pretty well. But take the last movie from the Pierce Brosnan era, Die Another Day, and compare it to the first 007 film from current Bond actor Daniel Craig, Casino Royale. They couldn't be more different. Die Another Day features Bond driving an invisible car, surfing down a glacier, Madonna fencing.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
And last but not least, a North Korean army colonel named Tan Sun Moon, who uses experimental gene therapy to disguise himself as a British inventor named Gustav Graves. Now jump ahead a few years, where Craig's Bond is introduced in a moody black and white sequence, where he tries to drown a man in a bathroom sink. As the movie goes on, you realize that this is a much angrier, brutal, but also much more emotionally vulnerable Bond than we've seen in the past. These two movies illustrate how much the 007 franchise is willing to change tones from film to film. Now look at the MCU. True, there's some films that are darker, some a lot wackier, but they all exist within the same universe, and as such need to have at least some tonal similarities with each other. If a new version of Tony Stark appeared and was as different from Robert Downey Jr.'s version as Daniel Craig's Bond is from Roger Moore or Pierce Brosnan, it would feel very off. Because unlike the Bond films, which reinvent themselves every few years, the MCU has to all hang together. And that's where continuity comes in, which honestly I think is the biggest factor here.
Arrow, crime fighter from the forest. Iron Man, power personified.
We've been living with the MCU for years now, so it's easy to forget just how radical of a cinematic experiment it was and continues to be. No other studio had attempted to launch such an expansive, interconnected universe. And it has some very exciting advantages, like seeing all of these heroes together. But I do think there's a downside to it as well, which is that recasting becomes very difficult. Sure, they pulled it off with Rhodey, but Stark himself? That's a totally different question. I'll use this example. Over the course of the MCU, Tony and Bruce Banner have become pretty good friends. This is actually one of my favorite things the Avengers movies have done, because it always felt like an underdeveloped relationship in the comics. And as fellow men of science, it makes sense that they would have a mutual respect for each other. But in a future movie where Downey has been recast, it would feel completely different. As viewers, we've seen Banner and Stark develop a friendship. You can't insert a new guy into Tony's shoes and expect their interactions to carry nearly as much weight as they normally would. That's the huge difference between recasting Iron Man and the previous recastings of Spider-Man or Batman. When Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man debuted, they didn't keep the continuity of the Raimi films. Imagine Garfield's Peter in a romantic scene with Dunst's Mary Jane. It wouldn't work, because as viewers, we already invested in Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker's romance with her. All of their scenes together in Spider-Man 2 and 3 were built on the foundation of their relationship established in the first movie. So it only made sense to go in a completely new direction with new actors and a new continuity. This is the same challenge that a new Iron Man actor would face, except doing a hard reboot of the MCU just isn't really possible, since it would mess with the continuity of the entire film universe, not just one franchise. Another thing that needs to be brought up is just how much Robert Downey Jr. specifically has shaped the way we think about Tony Stark, even in the comic books. A lot of you out there will disagree with me on this, and that's fine, but in my opinion, before Downey, the Iron Man of the comics could be a bit bland. Don't get me wrong, he still had some great stories told about him, some interesting personal demons, and could be really funny if written by the right person. But by and large, Iron Man wasn't thought of as an A-list character until his first movie. Downey's take on the character was so memorable and so fully formed right out of the gate that it fundamentally changed the way Iron Man was written. In a way, the persona of Tony Stark and the personality of Robert Downey Jr. have almost merged. And I do really mean the actor specifically. If you go back and look at the Iron Man screenplay, it's fairly bare bones. It was the actors and director Jon Favreau's improv skills that provided a lot of the funniest and most memorable moments. So I think that the character of Iron Man now owes a debt to Robert Downey Jr. in every medium, in a way that Spider-Man just never has to Tobey Maguire. In many moviegoers and even comic fans' minds, Iron Man and Downey's performance are forever linked.
I'm going to cut a section out of the pavement with the power jets in my shoes.
Now I know what you may be saying, but Captain Midnight, you're missing an option. All they have to do is pull a Tony Stark out of a different part in the multiverse or something, and he got an in-universe explanation for why he looks and acts kind of different now. And you know, maybe that could be done. This is a comic book based universe after all. There's no limit to the kind of cosmic mix-ups and resurrections that Marvel Studios could pull. But if that's the path they go down, I really 100% believe that that would also be the moment the MCU would jump the shark. It could maybe work if it was a performance that wasn't beloved, like Ben Affleck's Batman over at DC, but with Iron Man, I think there's a huge chance that general audiences would reject this immediately, and the new actor would be trying to step into huge shoes. Now if Rhodey or another character were to take up the mantle of Iron Man, that might work, and it would allow Disney to keep selling Iron Man action figures, but recasting Tony Stark? Bad idea. In the end, I think the best, most satisfying move would be to retire the Iron Man character after Robert Downey Jr. leaves the MCU and let new characters take the spotlight. Whether he dies or just enjoys a great retirement on some private island with Pepper Potts and his favorite robot, I think things need to come to an end for the character soon. Recasting Iron Man, at least in the next 10 years or so, seems like an almost impossible task. And I would hate to see them mess it up and diminish the legacy that the character has built up after so many years and so many films. To quote the man himself,
I am Iron Man.
Hey guys, be sure to like and subscribe and maybe share this someplace if you haven't yet, I don't know. But I will see you next week. We are getting really close to the release of Black Panther. I can't wait, it is just around the corner. And I want to know, what are you most interested in seeing in the Black Panther?